Joining me now, former Senator for South Australia, I can call you that now, Cory Bernardi, Mr Cory Bernardi, and the Daily Telegraph's opinion editor, as well as Outsider's host, Mr James Morrow. Gentlemen, great to have you on the show. Lots to talk about. I want to start with Donald Trump, the US President in Davos. I don't know if you've ever had to go to Davos for your sins. I have. I tell you what, you barely recover. It's wet and it's cold and it's snowy. And that's just the personalities inside the room. Now, Donald Trump, what did you make of his pushback very strongly there, James Morrow, Greta Thunberg, calling her and others prophets of doom?
Yeah, look, I thought Donald Trump did exactly what we would have expected Donald Trump to do in that forum, which was to go after Greta Thunberg, who has, of course, made Donald Trump out to be her #1 enemy. And I think that the real point that Donald Trump should be making with all of this is that, while they may have pulled out of the Paris Agreement, the United States has done very, very well to meet its emissions targets and reduce their emissions with new technologies and fracking and, going for natural gas and things like that. The Greta Thunbergs of the world are so resistant to new technologies, to any sort of thing other than the most radical action. It makes Trump look like a moderate.
Yeah, well, Mark Carney, who's the head of the Bank of England, Cory, he backs in Greta Thunberg over a lot of people who say there's got to be at least mitigation, risk management, adaptation and balance. He's sort of very much on the, despite all of his learned credentials, on the back of a speech from a 16-year-old inverting, world global financial theory. You've had a lot to do with international institutions. You had 3 months over there at the UN. What do you make of all of this, particularly Davos?
Peter, the bureaucrats have all drunk the climate Kool-Aid because they know that is their ticket to more money for government, the higher taxes and more government control. And I noticed this chap today said it's 8 years we've got 8 years to make action to have a 67% chance of averting some climate catastrophe. Now, I would put to you that about 67% of statistics around climate change are made up on the spot because none of these portents of doom have come true before. Al Gore told us we were all going to be drowning by 2015 and we've had a succession of predictions since. They've all been wrong. And Donald Trump is playing everyone off a break, and that's why he's going to win really well this year.
But Cory, isn't that why things have got ratcheted up to this point now of absolute hysteria? Isn't this why now you've got really an activist arm of the hard left, Extinction Rebellion, calling on protest movements right around the country, capital cities, shutting down, causing chaos? Because they're worried, I think, that they will be assessed against now in these timelines of 2020 and 2030, against what they said would happen 20 or 30 years ago when this movement really started hitting its straps. They're now being proven not to meet all of these portents of doom, but time's running out because eventually someone might say, this is the risk, gee, the emperor's got no clothes. So they've got to get the money in, they've got to lock in the commitments, and they've got to see off anyone around the world like Donald Trump who might question not the science, but question how we respond to risk.
This is exactly right, and you're right about this is a decade-long campaign. Remember in the 1970s, Time magazine had a headline saying we were entering into a new global ice age and that was going to cause us all to be destroyed. Now it's global warming and now it's climate change. Trump is calling them all out. And you notice that those who have been groomed in this space, the child activists like Greta and the acolytes around the place, none of them call out China. None of them are calling out the developing countries like India or Vietnam. The only ones they call out are their own, because this is a battle against freedom. It is a battle against Western culture and values. They want more socialism, more government control. They think government and the elites can make decisions for the rest of us, and they've brainwashed a whole generation into it. The pushback is starting, and I think that is going to have a massive impact in the decade ahead.
Hey, James Morrow, it was a bit entertaining in Davos in an impromptu sort of press conference by President Trump. He was asked a question, is he going to turn up to his own impeachment trial? And he sort of looked a bit half interested like he might and was goading the reporter. What do you make of the opening arguments from both sides?
Oh, I mean, look, Peter, I'm notoriously an insomniac. I have terrible trouble sleeping, but, you know, not even I can stay awake through most of that sort of stuff. I've been listening to it for the last couple of days, on and off. It is the most turgid argument that the Democrats are making. On the one hand, they say, oh, this guy is so evidently, clearly wrong and guilty, you know, we need to remove him from office right away. And on the other hand, they're saying, well, we think he might be guilty, so we need to have months and months and months and months of investigation and hearing in the Senate, which should have already been done in the House, to finally prove the guilt. You know, the problem is that that the Democrats started 3 years ago when Donald Trump was elected from the premise that he was guilty of something. They said we have to impeach him on something. They've got this whole Ukrainian phone call, but the problem is you actually listen to the arguments. Once you strip out all of the adjectives about how evil and horrible he is, what they're trying to do essentially is criminalize foreign policy and say that if you're a Democrat like Joe Biden or Hunter Biden, you should get a pass for any alleged corruption because, hey, you know, that's not good for the narrative of getting Trump out of the White House.
Cory, we're going to run out of time, and I'm going to table this as something I really want to get into next week, but there's been a UN ruling that broadens the category of refugee beyond just someone who is in fear of persecution, basically in fear of their life. We know there's all this debate about economic refugees, but now apparently we have climate change refugees. That won't necessarily be followed in Australian law, at least while the coalition is in power. But how dangerous is it?
This is very dangerous. The UN wants to bind governments around the world to their agenda. Their agenda is extraordinarily left. I would call it corrupt because I've seen some of the processes and the lobbying that goes on over there. But Australia needs to get out of this whole migration pact. It needs to renegotiate it because I don't think it's working for us. It's working against us. And mark my words, Labor and the Greens will be lecturing the Morrison government about this when Parliament resumes in the new year.
Yeah, and just to underscore Cory's point there, the risk obviously for us in the Pacific region is Kiribati and any other country that says we're an imminent threat of climate change, we need to move to Sydney or Melbourne or wherever. This is where it'll all come from this ruling from the UN. Got to leave it there, James Morrow, and welcome aboard Cory Bernardi. We'll come back to all of this next Thursday.